Now, I'm by no means a gearhead. I mean, I drive an automatic, but I appreciate car design and history. I appreciate what people do to their cars, rebuilding engines, body kits, and modifications that enhance the design or the performance of the car. For some people, cars are more than just vehicles that get you from one place to another. They're an expression, a style, they're a getaway from the mundane. So I've noticed that a lot of people are saying cars, more specifically SUVs, all kind of look the same. And they're not wrong. But there's a reason for that, and a lot of it has to do with
the regulations.
New regulations. There could be some new regulations.
Government regulations in safety.
Let me explain. Regulation is so ingrained in car design that when I saw the Cybertruck, I instantly knew this was not what we were going to get. When I say regulation in car manufacturing, I really mean pedestrian protection regulations or driver regulations. Cars are designed to deal the least amount of damage to an individual both inside and outside the vehicle. This is the main reason all cars and SUVs look like they do, but it's kind of indirectly. These regulations, these precautions are changing how cars look. For one thing, there needs to be a minimum clearance of, I believe, almost an inch from the engine to the hood of the car. That's because if someone is hit and flies up on the hood will soften the impact and the person is less likely to hit any hard points or engine parts of the car. So the hood is higher, but that also means your front end is a bit longer as well to keep a person away from the engine. But the other thing that's raised is the trailing edge of the vehicle. This part right here. Those two endpoints or bumpers dictate how your car will look. You see, there's a thing in car design called proportion. If you have bad proportion in your car, it starts to look bad. There are great examples of badly proportioned cars like the Suzuki X90, the Mercedes GLE Coupe, the Toyota Mira, and most famously the Fiat Multipla. Yeah, that thing. As you can see, proportional design is everything. I mean, have you ever noticed how the back taillights usually line up on a down angle to the front headlights for almost every car? And they all kind of set the height of the wheels. This is kind of the framework of good proportion design for cars, but there's more than just regulation that dictates the design of your automobile.
We sent Tracy Savage to a wind tunnel.
That's right, aerodynamics, because fuel economy is very, very, very important, especially during times like we're in right now. And aerodynamics isn't a new thing. It's been around for a long time. You had the Silver Arrow from GM, the Talbot Lago, the Tatra T77, and famously hated at the time, the Chrysler Airflow. But even before that, in 1914, the Alfa, or the ALFA, was designed by Marco Riccardi to directly hit higher top speed. This was a huge difference from what was considered the first modern car design. Ups to Mercedes for that, apparently. But getting back to the car design itself, because the front and back are higher, now your dashboard is moved up. The greenhouse or cockpit is raised. Pretty much the entire belt line or bone line of the car is raised. Now, if you follow that proportion, your roof line is going to be higher, but if you do that, it's going to look off. I mean, look at the Suzuki X90 or the overly large windshield of the Nissan Juke. But to really see what I mean, the Nissan Escargot is like the poster child for a poorly designed roof height. Remember when I said proportion was a huge reason for good or bad car design? If you raise the roof to be in proportion to the front and back, it doesn't work. Plus, this design does act like a greenhouse. With that much glass, you're baking, and let's not forget foreign road objects. Imagine if a rock hits your windshield and cracks it. That's a lot of glass to replace, and money we probably don't have. I don't have it. What designers have done is essentially raise everything up, while keeping the roof as if nothing else was changed. Yes, this gives you a lower roof, and it's getting harder and harder for people to hang their arm out the window, but proportionally, the car looks better. You can see this with the Cadillac CTS, or even more with the Chevy Camaro. I mean, if you kept the roof line high, well, just look at that. The greenhouse is getting smaller to the point where side windows are becoming slits, but people still like aesthetically pleasing vehicles, so they kind of deal with it. I mean, you don't want that truck driver tan anyway, right? Just look at the lineup that Chevy has currently. The Bolt EV and Trax all kind of have that bulbous roof. They don't look right. They look cartoonish. I'd say they both have bad design language. It isn't until you get to the Trailblazer or the Tahoe that you start seeing a more pleasing to the eye design. and that's because of the roofline. And don't think Chevy doesn't know this too, because look at the profile of the new 2024 Trax compared to the current one. That shape, that design is gone. Pillar design has evolved too. Have you ever noticed that it's a bit harder to see those blind spots or the quarters of those cars? That's because of federal regulation for rollover crashes. If the car rolls over, it needs to stay structurally sound, so they're reinforced to make sure they don't crumble and smash your head in, which is kind of a good trade-off. There's also a lot of technology in some pillars, like airbags, speakers, cameras, even blind spot detection, because the pillars are larger. Manufacturers have tried to hide this by making them gloss black to kind of match the windows or give you 360 views of your car through cameras. But these regulations and technologies kind of dictate what those pillars look like today. But that's not all that's affected by regulation. The tires are affected because of the higher hood. Look at the Smart 42 or the Fiat 500X, or the worst example, I think at least, the Nissan Murano crossover Cabriolet. The tires look tiny on those cars, but that's because the base of the car to the hood has become so much higher now. To compensate for all this additional material, designers have made the tires larger, so the wheel well fits more proportionally to the height of the car. I mean, look at the original BMW M3 compared to the most recent one. The car looks almost bloated, but that's because of regulation, better aerodynamics. But frankly, in my opinion, this is bad design to compensate for those two things. But surely, regulation isn't the only thing making cars and SUVs look the same. No. Like I said earlier, aerodynamics plays a huge part, but it's not just about better speed. There's a whole iceberg to discover here. While yes, a good aerodynamically designed car will help it go faster by giving it less drag, most consumer cars were designed with aerodynamics for better gas mileage. And that was pretty much because of the gas shortage in Europe during the 70s.
The worst is apparently yet to come in the oil crisis.
This is unreal. Isn't this disgusting?
I'm out of gas.
So in some way, Europe was the birthplace of the compact aerodynamic vehicle. Porsche, Audi, and VW all started creating smaller and more aerodynamic cars to save money at the pumps. While the oil crisis was hitting hard in Europe, it was affecting the States as well, but as European cars started to come into the US, consumers started to notice this new design and the fuel economy they produced. So of course, US manufacturers started to copy that design. And one of the first cars to copy that European fuel-efficient design, the 1982 Ford Sierra, aka the Jelly Car. And yes, it was a huge failure. But it was significant because it was one of the first cars to be designed in a wind tunnel and was a direct take on the concept of the Ford Probe 3. No, not that probe, this probe. This really was the turning point in car design, and it was largely thanks to Jack Telnick and his visionary idea to design cars within a wind tunnel. Going back to regulations, because it always goes back to regulations, from 1940 onwards, headlights were always circular glass, and not just headlights that were just circles. I mean, this one headlight was the headlight for all cars in the United States. It wasn't until 1984 that the sealed beam headlight finally turned off. So why did it take so long for the headlight to change? Well, in the 30s, manufacturers were still trying to figure out how to design cars. Each manufacturer had its own way of building these horseless carriages. One big thing was the headlight. Most cars had different designs or mechanics for the headlights. So if something would happen to these almost freestanding giant glass parts, it was almost impossible to replace. Performance was also a huge issue. What if they weren't bright enough, or sometimes they were maybe too bright? Or what if they weren't aligned correctly? You kind of needed a standard, something that would force all car manufacturers to follow a standard of regulation. For car safety. This is when the cars from the 40s to the late 50s needed to be equipped with two of those round headlights. That design was set in stone, and so cars in that era needed to be designed around those regulations, those two headlights. This regulation did help us see at night, and you knew if one went out, you could always get a new one because this was all you had. But the funny thing is, cars didn't look all that much alike at the time. Yes, you had that headlight on everything, but you notice some headlights moved out from the hood or were flush with the grille. Cars still had design to them because at the time, you still didn't have certain types of regulations. In Europe, it was a different story. You had glass over the lights. It was part of the car's design. It was done to make a car more aerodynamic, but in the US, that wasn't allowed. So car manufacturers started doing those pop-ups or covers for those lights. And if cars were imported here, you got what I think is a far more inferior version of that car. Car manufacturers had to fight to get domed headlights, ultimately winning the battle by saying cars can't meet peak aerodynamics because of current headlight regulations. This is a far cry from what we have now, where headlights have almost become the face of car brands and badges have become second or third in terms of how you identify a car brand. But now you have headlights that are kind of art, a statement on who you are. We have headlights built into the grille, built low, slits, even with sculptured design within the LEDs. But again, there's still regulation that car manufacturers must follow with headlight design. Ford would have an actual hit in 1986 with the pinnacle moment of automobile design change. The Ford Taurus was the future in 1986 and set forth the design language for cars in the early to late 90s. This was the poster child. Before the Taurus, you had nothing like it. Just look at the year's prior lineup from Ford and other manufacturers, and then after the Taurus. The car was designed with aerodynamics in mind. The headlamps were finally on par with European and Asian markets, and it was designed to look good. The Taurus was more important than you think too, because Ford was on the verge of bankruptcy. The company didn't have a hit in a while. It couldn't compete with the design and fuel economy of the Ford market, and with the Sierra being a failure, this was its last hope. Spending around $3 billion in the early 80s or about $7 billion in today's money, if this failed, we wouldn't have Ford today. The Taurus had a minimal grille, molded flush headlights, aero-style doors that wrapped around the frame, and was considered a futuristic vehicle, even being utilized in future dystopian worlds like RoboCop. But if you're a little younger than me and want another car to relate to, you can look at, and I swear to you, I'm not a Ford shill here, the Ford Focus. This was the turning point from the round jelly bean, bubbly design the Taurus started in the States to a more sleeker wedge shape. Yes, it had rounded edges, but it also had harder lines. It brought a unique design to the headlights. This was one of the cars that when you saw it at night, you knew it was a Focus. This was pushing aerodynamic design and aesthetic design to its limit. And like the Taurus before it, a lot of cars kind of followed the Focus's design language, even up to recently with the Kia Rio from 2017. The Focus would also see major design changes in the second generation and third generations, following better proportions and good design language while following more stringent restrictions. The Ford designers really took those regulations and worked around them rather than designing a car based on those regulations. The car was also designed for people like me, millennials. This was kind of our car. Yes, the Civic, Supra, and Intrepid were kind of our generation's car too, but this was an American hot hatch that was an even bigger hit in Europe. It sold almost 500,000 models in only its second year. The modern design of cars as we know it today began. So hot hatches and sleeker sedans were becoming popular, but also you saw a rise in crossovers and SUVs. While the AMC Eagle, a car released in 1979, was considered the first crossover, it wasn't until now, smaller yet big enough and cost-effective enough to purchase, crossovers were becoming big. In the year 2000, the crossover market was only at 4%. In 2018, it rose to 40%. One of the first modern crossovers was the 1994 RAV4, a car that's still being produced today, largely thanks to better aerodynamic design and fuel efficiency. These first generations were also built off sedan platforms, so they were cheaper to produce. The same popularity can be said for the SUV, which is different from the crossover based on the unibody construction. The first SUV was the 1984 Jeep Cherokee XJ. And again, due to regulations and better MPG, the vehicles were becoming more affordable. But this is where we start seeing copycats. And I'm not just talking about other manufacturers copying other brands, I mean internal brand copycats. Just look at the Chevy Cobalt and then look at the Pontiac G5. It's the same car. Look at the interior of the Chrysler 300 and now look at the interior of the Dodge Charger. It's the same car. This goes for modern day SUVs, crossovers, and sedans, or at least what's left of them. That's why a lot of brands don't exist anymore. Mercury, Pontiac, they were just copies of other cars. It takes a lot of money to redesign a car. Look how much it took to build the Taurus, and it could have failed. I mean, Kia and Hyundai are basically the same brand that's still swapping parts and rebranding cars today. And this isn't a bad thing. Look at modern phones. It wasn't until the iPhone that the standard phone design was cemented in stone. Before the iPhone, phones had radical designs, and there's a lot of people who miss those designs, but in reality, a lot of them didn't work well. I mean, look at some of these old phone reviews. No, the iPhone set a standard in design, and everyone followed it. It's not necessarily a bad design or a boring design, it's just a design that works. And I think people forget what design is all about. Design is about creating a better experience and efficient product. That's what happened to modern phones, and that's what's happening to cars right now. If you want a better example, look at these car doors. Can you guess which one is which? There was a time when car doors looked like this, but they created a more efficient design. This new design is easier to open, it won't freeze on cold days, and is more aerodynamic and more universal to intermix with other cars. If we wanted to redesign the door handle, that would call for more wind tunnel testing, focus testing, and making sure it follows regulations. Plus, if that door handle breaks, you need to make sure there's enough stock to fix and replace it. By creating a universal door design that works, the cost of manufacturing goes down, the ease of repair goes up, and to me, that's just good design. But there's also another reason why cars all kind of look the same, and it's you, it's me, it's the general public. Most cars really do look the same because of the color. If you notice, a lot of dealers only stock silver, gray, white, or black cars. If they do have color like blue or maroon, they're either very dark or gray with a hint of color to them. That's because dealers need to sell cars, and it's the buyers that dictate what sells. Plus, unique colors tend to cost more, and with regulations and new design, cars are larger, meaning it costs more to paint. Just look at the Tesla website and paint your car anything but white. And we tend to have simple colors because we know as consumers, if we want to resell, those muted colors sell better. Yes, there are some cars with brighter paint, more unique paint, but they're very specialized like sports cars or higher-end luxury cars. Less quantity than the mass-produced consumer brand, but also a higher price. It's a bit funny though, because we're going back to how cars were originally painted. Henry Ford famously said you can have any color you want as long as it's black. And that's because it was cheaper and faster to do. When cars were carriages for horses, they were usually painted in an oil-based paint, but oil can fade and take forever to dry. Cars were being mass-produced, and waiting for paint to dry would have killed Ford right then and there. So he went with an asphalt-based paint which lasted longer and dried quickly, hence all the cars were black. However, in the 20s, that all changed. DuPont created a new paint which was more durable and dried in minutes. This allowed colors like oranges, reds, and blues to be put on any car. This trickled down to economy lines, and for the first time, the general public had options. We were having a car revolution in design, colors, and technology. But I think this all changed in the early 2000s with my people, the millennials. Again, sorry. This was the time Apple was getting big again, and while they started with bright colors, they quickly turned to silver and white for all their technology. Technology was becoming sexy, and muted colors were in, but that's not the only reason. We were in a recession in 2009, and now. Even then, muted colors cost less and kind of look better in the bank account of potential buyers. If you stick with something long enough, it becomes the norm, and while the muted colors were out of a necessity, it became the standard color even when we were out of those hard times. A thing designers are flocking to now are headlights, grills, and interior design. But that's not always a good thing. Look at the BMW 7 Series and that grille. People hated that design, and yes, I don't think this is a good design either. Even though BMW's design chief said the entire line looked too much like all the other cars, they wanted to be unique. So, this is how you do it? The whole design of this car is the grille. The car wasn't designed around that grille. It's almost like the car was designed with a smaller grille in mind, and then they just put this on here. Which is kind of what he said. It's not good design, it's lazy design. It seems like a lot of designers are betting big on grille and headlight design. And while there's been some great looking design, there's been a lot of unfortunate design. Take Hyundai for one. This design is very contemporary. It looks interesting, it's unique, but is it good design? Or is it just a fad? In 5 or 10 years, is this design still going to look good? No, design isn't just making a car look interesting. A good design looks good all the time. Look at the 2003 Bentley Continental or the 2001 Mini Cooper. Hell, I think the 2011 BMW F10 M5 looks better than the new 7 Series. And that's all because of its great design and good proportions. That's not to say cars today don't have that iconic look. I think the new Nissan Z will be a design that lasts for generations. The Fiat 500 or the Ford Bronco will definitely be a modern classic one day. Even the new Z06 is a striking design that is both proportionally and aesthetically pleasing. So do all cars and SUVs look the same? Kind of. Because of regulations, because of hitting that better miles per gallon, because of the standard paint scheme. But look closer, there are subtle design changes in the grille, in the headlights, in the color. The interiors are where the design changes are really happening. Yes, cars and SUVs look similar, but like the phone, I think we hit a peak design standard and now we're waiting for that next milestone, that next evolution in car design, and dare I say, maybe it's an electric design. Obviously, electric cars have opened up for those car designers to create a more unique look to the modern sedan or even truck. Companies like Rivian, Lucid, or Canoo are starting to show what the next generation of vehicles will look like. Even BMW is getting into it, and I hate looking at concepts, but even this is kind of interesting. Like the Taurus, like the Focus, we are seeing design changes. Perhaps not as quick as the past, but then again, brands need to follow more and more strict regulations, and with electric, a whole new set of design and aerodynamic challenges are popping up. Anyway, let me know what you think. Do you see the subtle differences in car designs, or do you think they all look the same? Let me know what design you want to see come back, or what brand you think is doing a good job today. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.